Bible in a year in the One Year Bible, and today on October 24th we're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 44 verse 24 through chapter 47 verse 7. And as Jeremiah begins to draw to a close, here Jeremiah sums up his words of judgment, beginning with the people of Judah. The biggest sin was that the people made sacrifices to false gods. They even reasoned that once they stopped doing it, that is what caused the devastation that came about as Babylon invaded. However, that's not the case, just the opposite. It's because of their idolatry that they were ultimately punished for their sin. It seems that, in particular, many of the wives would instigate such sacrifices, though the husbands went along with it, or at least suggest that they make plans to do these sacrifices. The Lord said, go ahead, do them, see what happens, see what that gets you. For it would only bring further condemnation and prove the Lord's judgments as being true. The people who had fled to Egypt against the Lord's instructions through Jeremiah would end up paying for their rebellion. Only a few of them would return home. Furthermore, Pharaoh Hophra of Egypt would be handed over to his enemies. He was also known as Apries, and he reigned from 859 to 589 to 570 BC, that is. He had defeated Sidon, but then failed in his campaign against Cyrene in Libya. Then his army mutinied and elected their general by the name of Amasis as the new pharaoh. Apries was imprisoned but escaped, only to be murdered, most likely by the Egyptians themselves. So in this very convoluted way, Jeremiah's rather general prophecy was fulfilled. You'll notice that for good reason he didn't specify that Babylon would destroy this pharaoh, even though Babylon would end up defeating Egypt. So as chapter 45 begins, Jeremiah, as kind of a parenthetical point, speaks to Baruch, his scribe, who had suffered along with Jeremiah because he was so closely involved with his ministry. No wonder he was discouraged. Now, Jeremiah reminds Baruch that God himself was saddened at the destruction that would befall Judah. Furthermore, the Lord's judgment would affect the whole earth, would touch the whole earth. However, Baruch himself would be spared and should live his life simply and humbly, not seeking great things for himself. Somewhat ironically, it turns out that in the process, Baruch would be honored. As chapter 45 continues on to chapter 46 and 7, we see Jeremiah's oracles against the nations. Other prophets had oracles like this against the nations, including Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Nahum, and Obadiah. These oracles drive home the point that the Lord is God of the whole earth. The oracles in Jeremiah here begin with a poem, and as this poem draws to a close, we see that Egypt would seek healing but find none. Her piteous cry and screams were heard among the nations. Indeed, after the battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar advanced towards Egypt. In Jeremiah's second poem, we see the history that would unfold. Babylon would resume their attack by the end of 605 BC. Jeremiah pictures Egypt as a young heifer attacked by a large biting fly from the north. Also, Jeremiah presents a picture of a snake being driven from its hiding place by woodcutters, but unable to do anything more than hiss at them, who were cutting down the whole forest in which the snake lived. Both of these images would strike a blow to the religion of Egypt, along with all of their false gods. Lastly, judgment is pronounced against the Philistines, very similar to Egypt. Jeremiah saw the ruin of Gaza and Ashkelon, two towns that were the last bastions of the strength of the Philistines, but would be defeated. True to the prophecy, Nebuchadnezzar invaded the coastal plain and overran this area. Archaeologists have unearthed a letter describing the destruction, and also excavations have shown that there was the devastation of war that struck this area at this particular time in history. Very interesting to look at how archaeology in this case has confirmed what we see unfolding in the book of Jeremiah. Of course, God's word is true. Even though it is a rather harsh section and probably depressing to read, nevertheless, we see God's promise that he would restore Judah as kind of the undercurrent that runs through all of this section, even the oracles against the nations. May God be with you and bless you, and we